Welcome to Talks with Gallagher. We have Josiah with us in the house.
Hey, let's go.
So glad to have him on. We share many mutual connections, and I saw his post on Facebook about him starting a podcast, which we can talk about later. And so I was just inspired to, reach out to you and everything. So yeah, I'm just so excited to have you on today.
Man, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for the conversation for sure.
Awesome, awesome. So it's funny because I lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 4.5 years, but we haven't met in person yet. But we have shared many people that we do know personally.
Right.
And so I saw on YouTube some of your preaches, some of your messages, some of your raps. And so before we kind of dive into all of that, I'm just curious to hear your testimony in and what, just your story and what brought you to that place of ministry.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, I'm glad to be on here and sharing. So yeah, my life has kind of been I like to say a hodgepodge of many things. And has kind of led me to the journey where I'm at now, where I like to kind of dip in multiple lanes. So my background in ministry, really my parents in 2001 launched a ministry designed to help local churches with financial things and org chart structuring. My dad's background was in accounting, and the Lord really felt like the Lord was calling him into helping build the local church. And we would move around in Pennsylvania a little bit. We were in Concord, North Carolina for a time. Again, I was really little at this time. And then in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hits New Orleans, Louisiana, and completely devastates the city, the region. And my dad ends up going down with, Franklin Graham's ministry, Samaritan Purse, and goes
Mm.
down and on a chaplain trip and really just finds, a heart for New Orleans, for the city, for Louisiana. And because of that, decided and prayed about it and decided, hey, this is where our family's going to move. And so in 2006, we moved down to New Orleans. And previous to that season, we had moved once a year. But in that season, we ended up being there from 2006 until 2014. And my dad began to work with not just one local church, but really connecting churches across racial lines, across denominational lines, and really
Wow.
seeing what does it look like to be the kingdom. After Katrina, it wasn't just natural devastation, but there was just, relational devastation, specifically in the church. And so for me, I always grew up around ministry, obviously because of my parents. So I've walked with the Lord since I was young. There's
Mm.
been seasons of ups and downs through my youth that kind of distracted me and took me different places. Soccer was my passion. I played collegiately
Oh.
and really kind of put all my eggs in that basket until I felt like the Lord, said, hey, this is an idol in your life. You're
Mm.
really pursuing this because you want people to look at you. And I've called you to bigger and better things. And so at 19, I was playing soccer in Erie, Pennsylvania, attending Penn State Barron, studying digital media, and felt like God
Mm.
was like, this is not the path I'm calling you on. And I was serving at a church there, and ended up going on staff, left school, finished with an associate's degree, but went into full-time ministry at 19, and began working doing digital media, working with student ministry, and really just started getting a passion for what God wanted to do with my life more than just serving myself. And so since I was 19, I've been working in ministry. I've worked in different areas. The last
Wow.
season, we were just out in Seattle, Washington, at a church called The Pursuit, where me and my wife were kids and youth pastoring together. She was overseeing children's ministry. I was overseeing youth ministry, and kind of in tandem working with our generations team. And again, we've just seen God begin to do a lot of things through all that time. I grew up, I've always had a passion for music. And so I've done a lot of
Mm-hmm.
songwriting. And so I've released a lot of music myself. I'm actually in a process of kind of resetting. The last year was really busy, so I haven't done a lot of music
Mm.
recently, but I love also just working and networking with other people. And so for me, music's another avenue of cool. How can we find other creative people and invest in them? And to really, if I were to say my life in a nutshell, to where I'm at, seeking God, loving God, is I feel like in our culture, we kind of tell people, pick one thing, be good at it, and just put all your eggs in that basket. And I feel like God is more
Mm.
creative than that. I think that there are people who have multi talents. I think of it like a multi sport athlete who plays basketball in the winter and then plays, lacrosse in the spring and soccer in the fall. But in people's giftings, we often tell them, nope, you can just do one thing and that's it. And I think that if God's called you to multiple things, if He's gifted you in multiple areas, then you should steward that in the season that you're in. So if that means that you're going to be a husband in this season, and then you're going to be a husband and a father in the next season, while you're also running a business, but God's also gifted you this. If you're not sacrificing the integrity of your household and your family, then I say put your hand to it. And so for me, I've just realized, hey, God's given me giftings in multiple areas. Who am I to say that I can't do multiple things with His strength, with His power, and Him leading me to do so? And then also being flexible to give any of those things up at a time. And so I found myself kind of like, riding the roller coaster of life to get to this place. And so, yeah, that's kind of my background of where I'm at is, hey, I'm in a bunch of different lanes. I'm in a bunch of different spheres. And I feel like it's okay as long as you're constantly, reminding yourself of the integrity of your heart. Are you doing the right things? Are you not sacrificing things that shouldn't be sacrificed? But are you willing to make a sacrifice for things that could be?
Mm,
Yeah, I love people and I love music. And so what better way than to be a part of ministry, pastoring, leading people, walking with people through really hard situations. That's me and my wife's heart. Her background's a little more on the side of social work. We really, as we're planning
mm.
starting a church, we can talk a bit about that. We really want to help with
Sure.
families, adoption, foster care, that kind of thing. And so, again, our heart is for people, and I think people also love music, and so that's a great way to also have another avenue to reach people. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, music is such a powerful tool for the kingdom. Yeah, and I love like rap music. I've been to many different concerts like Lecrae and
yeah,
KB and Annie Mineo and others. And I'm curious. We can just jump in the music bandwagon right now. What are some of your music artists that have influenced you in
yeah.
your creative expression and music?
Yeah, I love music. I'm the type of person, I've told people for years, like on my playlist, if you were to go and look at my Spotify Wrapped is always worship music because I have it on in the background, but that's not a true
Mm,
expression of that's all I listen to. But I listen to all kinds of different things. You could find, I like Broadway. Like we just saw the new Wonka movie, and the music is
mm,
beautiful. And so I love the Broadway expression. I love like composing cinematic type of stuff. So literally I'll listen to like soundtracks from films. And
mm,
again, I do all of this because I think it fuels my creative juice. And then on a more practical sense, like, growing up, I was really into, that whole discovering hip hop. And then specifically with some of those Christian
mm,
artists like Lecrae, and Mineo, KB, those guys you've mentioned, all of those have
mm-hmm,
definitely inspired my music. But really recently, in the past couple of years, I've really discovered John Bellion as a producer, as an artist, who's not necessarily
okay.
specifically Christian. He's, I think he's on his own journey, like most of us are figuring things out. But in terms of seeing creativity and watching how God blesses people with like this lane to create and produce, he has become one of the
Mm-hmm,
biggest influences in my life in terms of
mm,
production, sound, style, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm all over the place. I always joke around with people that I could quote Kendrick Lamar and First Corinthians. I'm in the word, but I'm also receiving from the craft, right? And I think that there's
mm-hmm,
something to be said about being mature enough as a believer that you can observe other people's crafts and things and be able to separate,
mm-hmm,
like, oh, that doesn't mean that's my spiritual leader. Like Kendrick Lamar is not my spiritual father, but I appreciate the way he is as a rap artist. So I can listen to his music and hear the sound and the
mm-hmm.
style and be able to, differentiate from truth in that. You know what I mean? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people just kind of get stuck in that lane. And so I like to say I like to consume what I can, chew the meat, spit out the bones. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, all over the place in terms of pop, R&B, hip hop, all those kinds of things have influenced my music for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine because I've listened to some of your music and I'm like wondering, okay, where do these other influences come from? Because
Yeah.
as I mean, we're both creatives in different expressions, but
Yeah.
whatever we give our inputs kind of has that,
Right.
that other expression that kind of tails through in some capacity. So, yeah, I'm curious, like, what does your like creative workflow look like when you're, producing music? What does that look like?
Yeah. For me, I think sometimes I start with a concept most of the time, usually something that I'm either walking through in life or feel like God has highlighted to me as either an issue that other people are dealing with or just something
Mm,
encouraging. And I start with a concept and usually come up with a title or some lyrics first. And then from there, I kind of begin to mess around with some melodies and then produce stuff myself. I've worked a little bit with other artists too. And so sometimes, they'll send a beat or an instrumental and say, hey, this is the track, mess with it, do what you want. And then we tweak it from there. So sometimes it changes. But if I'm creating something from scratch, oftentimes it's from something that I've been, really just dealing with in my heart. Feel like, man, this could be a really powerful statement within lyrics. I've always just feel like gifted with words, which is also where the preaching comes in. And I feel like, how can I make this concept or this thought process or this idea that I've been dwelling on, how can I make it digestible for somebody? And I think music's an easy
mm,
way to do that. And so for me, I'll take that, write it down, start producing some music, then start adding other, flows and cadences into it. I always joke
mhm.
around with my wife. If you came into the room while I'm producing, it does not sound like what people think that don't know how music works in the background. She'll come through listening to me scrolling through a bunch of different kick sounds, just doom, da, doof, doof, doof. And people are just like, you would think that it just sounds magically. I press play one time and there it is. But no, I'll be doing that. And
Yeah.
then if I'm coming up with flows, it oftentimes sounds like I'm
Mm,
rapping in the spirit because I'm just like, and just figuring out like, cool, these are some cadences. But I just like to be
mhm,
creative with it in a sense of just open your mouth and allow something to happen. Same thing with like melodies. I'll start playing on the keys. And just start finding something that's like, oh, that's cool, that jives. Let's add some drums here. And
mm,
so it can kind of be a looping process. And then oftentimes I'll feel really hype about a song, work on it, create like a chorus and a verse, and then it's probably like another year or even 6 months before I like return to it because then I get stuck on the next thing, which I think is okay for my process because it kind of helps me get a
mhm,
fresh eyes when I come back to it and be like, oh yeah, I was just hyping the moment. This is actually garbage, or that was a great idea. Let's continue with that. But yeah, so it can kind of
mm,
fluctuate a bit, but I think part of the creative process is actually just again trying something for me, and then it's like, wow, that
mhm,
sounds good or it doesn't sound good. And then I have a couple trusted friends in my life that as a creative, I know you can respect this. For me as a creative, I've learned that you don't have to share every idea with everyone,
oh yeah.
because you'll be rejected, and all of a sudden that thing that was near and dear to your heart will destroy you. But
Mhm,
find those people who are not just yes men that are going to say, "Oh, this is the best thing you've
mm,
ever done or created," but people that do actually genuinely have your best interest in mind that you're close to. And so that for me, I have a couple guys that I'll text anytime I make something. I'll send a sample to and be like, "Hey, is this it? Am I hitting it? What would you change? What would you do?" And those are the people that I've been able to kind of help fuel my creative process. Because again, you do need
mm,
encouragement. I think it's a spiritual gift that we don't talk about as
mhm,
much in the New Testament, but encouragement, I mean, it's huge. Just
yeah.
tell people that they're doing a good job, like love on people in that way versus just always criticizing, because then when you do
Mm,
give feedback, somebody can receive it. And so I've found those guys in my life to be super advantageous to say, hey, encourage me, but also if you think this sounds weird, great, tell me that, because let's try and make it better, because excellence is definitely the top priority.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's some really important wisdom you have to share. Yeah, I think artistic community is so important in your creative development and process. And you're right, knowing who to share your
Yeah.
ideas with, because it's like a baby, it's your baby,
Absolutely.
the creative creation that you have, and so you got to be careful with who you share your baby with, right?
Right. Come on now.
Yeah, so that's good. So yeah, just to maybe shift gears a little bit more, I'm curious about like what brought you to decide to go into ministry, because not every, I mean we're all called to you
Right.
know share the gospel, right? But not everyone is called to um, uh, pastor, preach, in more of a larger capacity,
Right.
like yourself. So what what made you what prompted the decision for you um, to be a pastor and to
Yeah.
walk into that further?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I would agree too. To anybody listening to this, man, if you're a Christian, you're called to ministry. And I think that most of the time, I think we're in an interesting age of
Mm-hmm.
social media because this is the first generation of Christians with access to social media. And I think
Mm,
because of that, we're seeing this weird, almost expectation of if you don't do vocational ministry, that you're not fulfilling your calling or you're not, committed enough to the gospel. And I would say that's farthest thing from the truth. I would say unless you're called to be a pastor or you're called to be, in vocational ministry, don't do it. I would say it's the hardest
yeah.
thing that I've ever put my hand to, but I would never want to do anything else. And so
Mm,
for me, what really got me to that place was when I was 18, I really felt was a season. I had a spiritual father in my life who was really just investing in me. And I felt like I had the greatest
mm,
encounters with God that I've ever had at 18. And all of a sudden I had this revelation of the church, right? I grew up with my dad
mm-hmm.
having a value for the local church, finding small churches that needed help, finding those things. And so for me, I always like, again, there wasn't I think being in church on Sunday is one of the greatest things you can do. It doesn't get you saved, but it does create spiritual habits and disciplines into
Yeah.
into the kingdom. And so for me, I just always grew up around going to church, being at church, being involved in the prayer house. When we were in New Orleans, we were part of the IHOP had launched a house of prayer
Oh
in
wow.
Louisiana, and so we were there all the time. I remember being in my early teens, just being at prayer sets and that kind of stuff. Again, none of
Mm,
that is earning God's love, but what it does is create discipline and desire.
mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I began to be awakened at 18 to all this stuff that was poured into my life from when I was a kid, and was like,
Mm,
man, I felt like, again, I think we get missional, and sometimes our mission is to go overseas into other places.
mm,
But for me, I had this awakening of a missional call to America. I
mm,
began to just even see things in church again because I grew up traveling to different churches, and so I got to see a lot of different dynamics. And I was
mm.
like, this honestly is a mess. People are messy, like
Yeah.
let's not pretend they're not, but there's such a beauty in actually allowing God to change the mess versus, again, I've heard
Mm,
it this way. Being a hypocrite isn't struggling. Being a hypocrite is pretending that you don't. And so
mm,
how do you actually be in the struggle of, I'm a Christian going through a sanctification process. I'm growing to be more like
mm,
Christ every day. But how do I actually be honest about that? But also hold myself to a standard, right? Like Paul says, if you don't
mm-hmm.
know any better, that's different. But once you do, he's telling the church in the New Testament, now you're held to a different standard because now you know what sin is. Now you know what it is to be far from God. And I
Mm,
think when I began to like have this awakening at 18, it was like, man, I never want to be a part of a movement that doesn't value people and leading people through authenticity, real relationship with God. And so for me, that's when I began to work in church, was 19. And so I was like, man, this is awesome. And I've gotten a lot of great experience. I've had great leaders around me. And
mm,
again, naturally, you're going to learn the do's and don'ts in church. Like there's going to be things that you're like, oh, I'm never going to do that when I'm a leader. And there's things where you're going to go like, that's the best thing I've ever seen. I want to do that. But I think you've got to be humble and
mm-hmm.
recognize, sure, those leaders as well in your life have probably had a season where they said, I would never do this, but then got to that place. And so how can you
Mm-hmm.
be authentic, care about the leader, care about the ministry? And so for me, it's really designed this inner part of me where I would rather never do anything. I think preaching is a gift, but it's not a call. I think the call is people.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ministry is the call. I think leading people closer to Jesus is the call, and preaching is a tool to be used. And so again, back to my
Mm-hmm.
point about the social media age, I think we've been
Yeah.
become hyper consumed with the gifts and not hyper
Mm,
consumed with the development of our hearts and our character. And I think
mm,
that's why we've seen, again, unfortunately, some falling outs in the church with pastors and leaders. And
yeah.
again, and I think in our culture, with the way that we are, we want to cancel and throw everything out on the first go. But I just feel like for me as a young person, I'm 25. I feel like God has given me such a grace on my life to see things, be able to look into environments that I've been a part of and go, man, I
Mm-hmm.
can honor that. Man, I can receive from that. Man, I can choose some of that and spit some of that out. And what
Mm-hmm.
God wants to do with me and my wife as we plan to plant a church in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, our heart is that there are unreached people. Look at this. There's I think there's 70,000 people in the zip code demographic of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And when we look at the statistics, there are two churches that have about 1,100 attendance on the weekend, and those are the biggest churches in the area. So if you add up
Mm,
all the small churches and those two big churches, That's about 60,000 people probably that are unchurched in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Again, these are not the ends of
Wow.
the earth. This is not a remote village in Kenya. You know what I mean? This is America, and
Yeah.
we are failing as the church because we're too consumed with
Mm,
our gathering and playing it safe versus
mm,
expansion. And so for us, our heart is to expand, to create something here that would then again go to the ends of the earth. But I think most of the
mm,
time what happens is we get in Christian communities and we get into Christian clubs and we go, hey, we're going to hide out here. We're going to create our own institution. We're going to have our
mm,
own schools. We're going to have our own systems because we hate the world. And I just
mm,
have been realizing over the last couple of years that what are we talking about? The gospel is not a
mhm,
us and them. This is for all of people. And I was just like them before I was
mm,
saved. And so my heart is for people. And so again, to kind of say what you're to answer your question, really the reason I feel marked and called to ministry is because God has put a deep burden in my heart for the lost people and people who think they are found. That's a phrase that I've kind of
mm,
adapted. People that are, again, checking the boxes in church, think that they're serving God and have just become, religious to those things, simply to the Pharisees. And again, what is our life's motto? Our life's motto is that again, Jesus, to come to seek and save that which was lost. So who are we to change that mission? Who are we to change that
mm,
idea? That's our responsibility. John 4, Jesus says to the disciples, he says, the fruit of your harvest is that people enter into eternal life. That's it. If we're not doing that, that's amiss. And so for me, vocationally
mhm,
is what I want to do. But again, like people like you and other people who have different giftings, how can you
mhm,
use your gift to get people to enter into eternal life?
mm. Wow, so good. You said so many things there where
Sorry, I just get going
I was just getting
sometimes.
just light bulbs going off in my head, and you said some really profound things too, about the state of the church and how it needs to, recognize the importance of process and character and development, and
Right.
living in this Western culture where you have instant this, snap that, you know, press this,
Right.
fast food this. So, yeah, and people try to apply that to spiritual things, and that doesn't, that
No.
doesn't always work, right?
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I think you're really, hitting a nerve here in the body of Christ that is so important, especially for the emerging generation, and yeah, I love your heart on that. That's so good. It's so important, and it's something that is really needed in the body of Christ for the next Reformation, right? Because how can
Right.
we expect there to be this big revival if there isn't a reformation of the church,
Come on.
worldwide to be set? You need to have that standard set in order for there to have that sustained
Absolutely.
change of the church, right? So I mean, I'm hearing your heart on this, and it's so good. Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually the first, you know, episode for 2024. You're the first guest for 2024, and
Hey,
I'm
let's go.
curious. I'm curious. Do you have like a word for this year, for 2024, for emerging and seasoned leaders?
Yeah, I would say that this is the word that the Lord has really struck to me at the end of 2023, and I've just been thinking it and ruminating on it. But it's the word discipline.
Mm,
I really feel that as leaders, it is so easy to become undisciplined because of the value of routine. And if
mm,
routine is more important to you than discipline, you will find yourself operating in last year's oil. You'll find yourself operating in last year's encounter. You'll find yourself operating in something that you had with God in the past, but is not something that you have in the present. And if we're
mm,
going to change the world, if we're going to impact people and lead people, then we've got to be leading and impacting ourselves. We got to be having encounters daily. And so,
mm,
again, I've kind of hit on it in the last statement I made, but to be disciplined is not because I'm trying to earn anything from God.
mm.
But what I am trying to do is put effort into my relationship with him. Right. If I try to
Yeah.
tell my wife that I love her, but yet every time she asks me to do the dishes, I just don't do them. What I'm actually communicating is that I don't love you with my actions.
Mm,
because what I'm saying is what you're saying to me doesn't mean anything. Now, does it mean that we're no longer married? No. Does it mean that, she's going to leave me today? Hopefully not. But what I'm hinting at, right, is that
yeah.
the covenant exists with God, but most of us operate out of a different time that God saved us, a different time that God did something for us, and we think that's going to run us the rest of our life. And again,
Mm,
you are saved. I'm not questioning that. I'm not arguing that. I think that you can
mm-hmm,
totally, again, look at the thief on the cross. He doesn't fit into anybody's theology. And the moment he gives his life to Christ and he enters in, didn't have to get baptized, didn't speak in tongues, didn't prophesy the walls off a building. You know what I mean? He just entered into paradise with Jesus. And so again, the question on the line isn't, are you going to be saved? My question is it's not about getting into the kingdom of heaven. It's about getting the kingdom of heaven into you. And I think when we look at Jesus, even the way he describes the kingdom, sometimes I think he's referencing the actual heaven, the actual physical place, eternity. But also,
mm-hmm,
there's other times where I think he's talking about the principles of if you are
mm,
going to inherit the kingdom of God. Oftentimes, when he's saying that, he's talking about the disciplines in your life, right? Look at the young
mm-hmm,
ruler who comes to Jesus. He's done everything right. He's gone to every right rally. He's been at the good protests. He's been generous. He's followed all the laws of Moses. And Jesus says, sell all your possessions and then you can follow me. And what he's
mm,
saying is again, saved isn't the question. But if you're
mm-hmm,
going to have the kingdom of heaven in your heart, then any idol you have has to be pulled down. And so for
mm,
me in 2024, as a leader, as a pastor, I'm encouraging other leaders and pastors find godly, healthy, holy habits and be disciplined to them. Not
mm-hmm,
because you're trying to create a religious pattern, but because you're trying to increase that quality of the relationship you have with God. Right? I've heard it this way too. Like you should schedule time with God on your physical calendar. Why?
mm-hmm.
Because if it's not, it won't happen. Because just like anything, I won't go
Yeah.
to it unless it's on my calendar and I get a Google notification 5 minutes before that tells me, oh, that's coming up. Oh, that's right. I completely forgot about that. And I think if
Mm,
we don't schedule it, not because of a religious thing, but because of no, this
mm-hmm,
is intentional. I'm scheduling time with God Almighty. I need to make this a habit in my life. And then
mm-hmm,
because of that time, he's going to show me other disciplines. And again,
mm-hmm,
I think especially in a charismatic expression and ways we sometimes
mm-hmm,
we lack discipline because we are more concerned with the gifting than we are with
mm,
the stewarding of the gift.
mm,
I think we ask God for more wine, but we've done nothing with the wineskin. We ask
mm,
God to give us more salad dressing, but we don't even have a plate full of ingredients for him to put the salad dressing on. You know what I mean? We've
mm.
we've
Yeah.
created this idea of we want
Mm,
the holy goosebumps and we want to be able to prophesy and we want to be able to do those things. And I think we become more concerned with ourself than it is how we are
mm,
being used and discipled to be there for other people. And so for
mm,
2024, I think as we step into a new year, pastors, leaders, how do you create discipline in your life? If you have anybody, again, if you run a business, if you're over an organization, how can you steward the people well? That's your job as a leader, is stewarding people that God has entrusted you to have influence over. And again, our culture
mm,
defines influence differently. But to me, I think influence is are people looking at you. All right. Look at Paul. He says,
mm-hmm,
follow me as I follow Christ. We all know this. But what is he talking about? He's talking about himself because he's trying to remind himself, I am an influence. And I think for us, what we often forget is that people are watching, people are listening. I've had conversations this year with people already that have
mm,
come up to me and talked about content that I post. I'm like, I didn't even know you followed me on any platform. Because again, as a leader, as a
mm,
pastor, as somebody who's
mm-hmm.
trying to advance the kingdom, you should expect that people are going to be following and watching you. And so what that shouldn't scare you, but it should. It should
Yeah.
put a healthy fear of God. I'm representing God to people and I don't even know if they're
Mm-hmm,
listening. And if I'm
mm-hmm.
foolish enough to post it thanks to social media, then I better believe it in my heart because I better not be one way on the Instagram and a different way in real life. I better be the same
Right.
person. And again, I think that's something that you should be asking yourself every day, right? That's the discipline.
Mm-hmm,
Am I really being a man of integrity? Am I really being a woman of integrity? Is this who I
mm-hmm,
am, or is this a facade that I've created? But yeah, I mean,
mm.
just being disciplined. That's what I'm trying to hit with people this year.
That's so important. My goodness. Yeah. Yeah. And you were able to really define that well practically because sometimes people think discipline is, you know, different things,
Right.
and so, yeah, you're able to really, you know, really hit that well. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
kind of in similar vein to this, since the pandemic, the last 4 years seems like the church has really changed considerably in different ways. Many churches recognize that technology is actually a good thing when it comes
Yes.
to reaching people. What do you see for the future of the church? As your experience and also your heart for young people. What do you see like the church the next 10 years, for example?
Yeah. Well, I'm genuinely, as much as it stinks, I'm praying for persecution for the church, especially in the Western culture. I think the reason why we've become so
Mm-hmm.
appetizing, with the church is because there's no real cost for Christianity in the West. And
Mm-hmm.
again, naturally, yeah, oh man, well, people are gonna judge me or dislike me. I mean, if that's the counting of Christ, that's the cost that you got to pay. Come on now, like, people in other countries, right? We know this. We've said this for years, but I really think like
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to get a picture of that. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of urgency that I see in the church, not in America, to like, this is the hour. We don't know if we're going to have another opportunity to share the gospel. We don't know if we're going to have another opportunity to impact people's lives. And I
Mm-hmm.
would also say this. I think that as the church, and I could be canceled for saying this maybe, but I'm not going to say anything too crazy. But I'm just saying, I think the church, especially in the West, has to get away from the evangelical mindset of a sinner's prayer. I think
Mm-hmm.
we've created this as the all-time goal. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that the best way to represent Christ is not to necessarily name drop him, but to be like him.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I've encountered people and I've loved people and been in their life, and people are like, "Well, man, did you get him to say the prayer?" And I'm like, "Man, no, that's not my goal." Because I also genuinely don't believe a,
Yeah.
a prayer without any heart saves anybody. What I do think saves
Mm-hmm.
someone is when they believe in their heart and make that connection. So, for example, I think like you again, when I preach, I'm always going to give an altar call and I will give a response at the end of a message. And I will say, hey, if you want to give
Mm-hmm.
your life to Christ, I will do that. And I'll still ask people to raise their hand. But here's why I ask people to raise their hand, because I believe that when they raise their hand, that is the belief in their heart making a physical expression. And I believe they're saved in that moment. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm after that, I don't
Yeah.
say, okay, now repeat after me and say this, 2-year-old prayer, right? Because who talks like this anyway, right? We say, dear Jesus, like, you know what I mean? It's just weird.
Yeah.
And for me, what I see happening is every time I
Yeah.
look at Jesus, when he leads somebody to him, he doesn't make them say a sinner's prayer. All he does is show up, create a miracle, create an emotional response, and all of a sudden, when they respond to him, he says, "Go and sin no more. You've been saved." Essentially, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be doing the same thing. And so at the end of a message, after someone puts their hand up, I say, let me pray for you. And then I pray for those people. And I say, God, use these people. God, you've saved them today. God, you love them today. Why? Because it's about them getting in their heart. And if it gets in their heart, they're going to say it. They're going to begin to live it differently. And so, again, I
Mm-hmm.
just genuinely believe, again, I've had other encounters with other people where I've met people and I've spent time with them and I've invested in them. And people are like, man, did you lead him to Jesus? I said, I'm trusting that God is leading them unto him. I'm trusting
Mm-hmm.
that there might be somebody that I've met and had a conversation with in the last 24 hours that's been on their bed crying out to God and saying, God, I'm giving you one last chance. And if you don't show up, I'm out of here. And then all of a sudden they meet me. We have a conversation. And I believe that they go home and the God of the universe speaks into their heart and says, I sent that man for you.
Mm-hmm.
That is more powerful than me trying to evangelize on the street, telling somebody about something that they don't care about when I have no relationship with them, leading them to the
Mm-hmm.
gospel. And again, I'm specifically speaking to America on this, right? I think the
Mm-hmm.
church in other countries is a whole different ballgame. Because again, the
Mm-hmm.
gospel is not reaching
Yeah.
those areas. But in America, it would blow me away if you've never heard about Christ or church in general, right? The bigger
Mm-hmm.
issue is most people were in church, got hurt in church, and now we're out of church. And so, how am I going
Mm-hmm.
to reach somebody like that? Is definitely not going to be by saying, hey, do you know about the gospel? Because they're instantly going to have a hard heart to that. And so, I think, how do we change this? What does the church got to do moving forward? I
Mm-hmm.
totally believe in digital media and social media. I'm actually starting a social media business right now with some friends to start helping churches with that. Like you said, people,
Wow.
disarming the value of being on digital media. And I believe that if we're going to be relevant in
Mm-hmm.
America in 2024, you best believe there should be positive content on social
Yeah.
media. And don't tell me, oh, well, it's evil. Well, then you change it. That's why we're here. We're here to change culture. We're not here to be afraid of it. We're not here to
Yes.
run away and create our own schools and universities just so that we can play church and play God. No, the whole
Mm-hmm.
purpose is to be in the world. The whole purpose is to be there to change it. The whole purpose is to heal people on the Sabbath and rile up religious folk. That is why we are here. We're to release freedom into people's lives. And so, one, we've got to be on social media and influencing, because again, we've got to get ourselves into the algorithm. We've got everything going against us. So what do we got to do?
Mm-hmm.
We've actually got to be more intentional. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
again, for us to quit and say, oh, and again, don't call that persecution either, because Instagram didn't put you in the algorithm. uh, but what I mean is that we do
Yeah.
have to develop some ways to actually get a message across. I've heard testimony after testimony
Mm-hmm.
of people who've ended up in a church because they saw something positive and encouraging on social media. And if that's
Mm-hmm.
happening, great, we need to do that. And then number two, outside of social media, just start spending time with people. I think as Christians, we spend more time at
Mm-hmm.
conferences than we do having dinner with our neighbors. We spend more
Mm.
time consuming stuff and knowledge for ourselves than we do telling people about a God that loves them. This is
Wow.
who the church has to be if we're going to
Mm-hmm.
see a great awakening, right? That's where I've been stuck on
Mm-hmm.
this and been really provoked in my spirit. Paul used that word, so I'm gonna use that word. Provoked in my spirit
Yeah.
recently, thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
especially again in the charismatic movement, we sing songs like, God, pour your spirit out. God, we want revival. God, we want
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like the onus is on God. Friend, the onus is on us. God has
Yeah.
already poured his spirit out. In Acts 2, Peter stands up and he says, this is what Joel prophesied. Why are we still asking for what Joel prophesied today? Peter said it on the Acts 2 day, the day of Pentecost. He says, this is what Joel
Mm-hmm.
prophesied. That's why you are hearing different languages. That's why you're seeing people come to Jesus. And what happens? 3,000 get saved. And so, again, in the church, we've got to stop this language of God do
Mm-hmm.
something. We need a move of
Mm-hmm.
God. No, we need a move of people. You need to do
Mm-hmm.
something. You need to start changing the ways that you live. You need to stop going so hard in church and actually love your wife when you go home. You just see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We're in
Yeah.
this predicament in the church, and I'm seeing it time and time
Mm-hmm.
again, really coming down to this lack of integrity. Like, you say you love God, but what does Jesus say? It's love God and love people. So you can't just love
Yeah.
God and call it a day. If you don't love people, you can't love God, because he loves people. And so again,
Right.
all that to say, social media influence for people and real life influence for
Mm-hmm.
people. The mission is people. If the church is going to advance, we got to care about people.
Wow, that's so good. Yeah, really exposing some cultural idols here, guys. Wow, this is so good. Yeah, and you're like describing like getting back to the basics, getting back to, the right standards, the right priorities, the right alignment, right? And also, shifting away from religious language to, kingdom language,
Right.
and also looking at the importance of discipleship and what does that mean to a believer, and not being hypocritical in your in
Right.
as a believer in your daily life. So yeah, wow, you're you're really hitting on some really important uh things that the church needs to be awakened about and to
Yeah.
come into its fullness in. So wow, this has been really powerful. You've been sharing with us. Man, this has been so good. Uh, wow. I'm a little speechless right now just because you're just hitting on so many good things here. And I think it's important for the West to recognize its sacred idols, so that it's no longer hindered
Right.
by what God ultimately has for the church here. And you're so right on so many levels with this. And so yeah, it's so encouraging to hear,
Yeah.
because sometimes you wonder, are there people that are also awake, or is it just me that's awake?
Right. Right.
So it's good to hear this from you. And we have other people also watching from Europe and South America and other places in the world that are grateful and thankful to to hear this coming from um, an emerging leader like yourself. So So yeah, I'm curious. Just to shift gears from this
Let's do
serious
it.
conversation, can you do any like, dry, hot, um, spontaneous rap or something that you can do just to share some of
Man,
your ability?
listen, yeah, hold on. I can come up with something real quick.
Okay.
I have some notes that I don't have
Yeah.
to
Can you have
freestyle it, but I
some
can
bars to share with
I can
us?
give you something. Hold on, let me find a good little spot right here. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, that's the wrong thing. That's why. All right, I'm looking through my notes. Give me a half second. Here we
Okay, no
go.
problem. Prepare yourself, everyone.
Yeah, prepare yourself. You gotta keep it light. I'm getting too intense with all these people. All right, here we go. No, let's not do that. I'm trying to do something that's. I was just being so like intense. I can't be aggressive now.
Yeah.
I gotta.
Well, do whatever
Here
you
we
are
go. Here
led
we
to
go.
do.
Yeah. um. Let's do this part right here. The voices in my head won't shut up, cut up. All my confidence that I wanna run up. Arrogance can be the other route, brother. I'm trying to beat this doubt, Mike Jackson, another. Changing my style and sound with no speakers. Noise in my mind, it's loud with no bleachers. The feelings that I got have no class like teachers. Running on my check so low like sneakers. There you go.
Wow. That's really good. Wow,
There you
that's
go.
that's like um pure poetry as well at the same
Hey,
time.
thanks, bro. That's it right there. That's
Yeah.
unreleased. That's unreleased. So that's special just for you.
Unreleased. Well, thank you.
Unreleased.
Thank you. We feel so honored for some dry bars,
Yeah.
unreleased poetry here.
Come
Wow,
on.
that's so good. So good. Well, before we close, is there anything else you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, man. Well, this has honestly been great, and I think for myself, just to kind of to reflect,
Yeah.
again, if this is your first encounter ever hearing my voice, wow, this guy's really, excited and passionate. That's it. That's true. And for me, I just care so much about, I think we as people hate to be misrepresented, and I just
Mm,
think who has been misrepresented the most but Jesus. And
mm,
if we want people to really know this God that we know, that we say we know, then man, how much deeper should we feel this idea that we want him to be represented for who he is? And I just say, hey, if
mm,
you're out there and you've been hurt by the church, let me apologize to you and say, man, people
mm,
have done you wrong, but God has not done you wrong. And vice
mm,
versa, if you're the person in the church, but you care more about your spirituality than the people sitting around you, if you're more concerned with about somebody sitting in your seat than the opportunity you have to love them, friend, God loves you too. And
mm.
he's looking for you to come back to the basics. I love the way that you said that. I think that that's what it
That's
is. That's really what my
yeah,
heart cry is can we
yeah,
go back to just read the gospel? Just watch how Jesus operated. Just watch
yeah.
how the early church operated. It's about people. They
Mm-hmm,
broke bread together. They got
mm-hmm,
together and they reached people in their community. Why? Because they were in their community. And so,
mm-hmm,
hey, I just feel like this is an opportunity. This is a new season. The kingdom is coming. The kingdom is at hand. And the way we bring the kingdom to the earth is by doing exactly what he said to do, right? Our
mm-hmm,
relationship, our status doesn't change with God based on whether or not we obey him, but
mm-hmm,
the level of our intimacy and our ability to have power and impact and authenticity does come from those disciplines. And so
mm-hmm.
I really appreciate having the opportunity to even just get excited because I always do. And this is why people are like, oh, when you preach, you sound the same. Yes, that's the goal. Because in my normal conversation, my
Yeah.
wife will tell me all the time when I'm talking to somebody on the phone, she's like, why are you preaching on the phone? I'm like, listen, when it's a message inside of me, it's got to get out of me. I don't care if it's a song, it's a phone call, or if it's a sermon. Come on, somebody. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm,
appreciate you taking the time, man. I just want to encourage you, keep doing what you're doing because on the same vein, who knows who's listening? Who knows
mm-hmm.
where this is hitting? And it could be a 10-second bit out of one of your hour-long talks that really just changes somebody's life. And so I appreciate you, what you're doing, and I'm super grateful to get to be on here with you.
Oh wow, I feel the same. Yeah, it's a true joy and honor to have you on. Thank you for trusting me and your willingness to be on as well. That
Yeah.
means a lot. So, where can everyone find more about your ministry, about your music, about everything you have to offer?
Yeah, so just my name on all social media platforms, Josiah Malinich. Malinich is how you say it, like spinach. Come on, and you can find music there as well. I'm actually in the process. I had a stage name, but I'm kind of just consolidating everything as Josiah Malinich right now. So you'll see all that as music. We'll be out on that. You can find YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of the above. And then, if you're following me, you'll learn more information about our church. We're in the process of planting a church, which I hinted at a bit earlier. We're working
Mhm.
with a network called ARC, the Association of Related Churches, and our goal is to plant in Mechanicsburg in the next couple of years. So if you're in Mechanicsburg or you're near Mechanicsburg, come on, be excited. We're coming, and we're excited about what God's going to do through us. But yeah, just Josiah Malinich. Look me up, follow me, music, speaking, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, would love to connect with anybody.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, please follow him and listen to his music on Spotify and even the new things coming out.
Come on.
Yeah, find him on social media and on the website and his messages too. They'll fire you up. So, yeah, just so glad to have you on. And guys, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all those things so that we can share and spread the word out to everyone. So, thank you everyone for listening to Talks with Gallagher. We'll see you till next time.